Want to let the song breathe a little bit, like wine. Let it open up. All right, I'm always happy to do interviews, and I especially like them when they're good young people with a bright future, like Jacob Rich. He is a policy analyst at Reason Foundation and a Young Voices contributor. Jacob, I brought you on because I want to focus on the positive, not the negative. So Trump has done some very good things, particularly in the direction of drug prices and our accessibility to generic prices. So can you tell me a little bit about his executive order?
I most certainly can. Thanks for having me on, Steve.
Sean, I'm much better looking than Steve, and I'm also built a lot better like a man, but go ahead.
Oh, I was told I was going to be... Okay, well, no, thanks for having me, Sean. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
So, back on July 24th, President Trump signed an executive order to allow the importation of pharmaceutical drugs from other countries. Earlier, the Food and Drug Administration gave a notice of proposed rulemaking to import drugs from Canada, and now the administration is moving forward with a focus on insulin. So, basically, Trump was looking over some of the research that came out of the CBO that showed that if we started importing drugs from Canada that are already approved by the FDA, already shown to be safe and useful in the United States. If we start re-importing those drugs into the United States, we might save $7 billion per year over 10 years. I'm sorry, $7 billion over 10 years.
Now,
that's a significant savings. And with unprecedented healthcare spending at the moment, anywhere that we can find savings through proposed rulemaking and reductions of regulations is always welcome.
And that's where I feel, too. I also am very aware of the stranglehold our medical patent system has on American drug makers. And I don't think people understand that the reason these drugs are so cheap in different countries isn't anything other than an abuse of American drug makers by a system that is directly attached at the hip with government that makes it very difficult for them to be cost efficient.
Oh, most certainly. I mean, the entire system was basically written by the pharmaceutical industry to extract as much profit from taxpayers as possible. I mean, right now, written into law, it is completely illegal to import drugs from foreign manufacturers and foreign pharmacies, even if the drugs are already approved for usefulness in the United States. I'm not talking about drugs that are approved by other countries. I'm saying the same exact drugs that are approved for use in the United States. For example, if you go to Mexico, you can get a Novolog insulin pen for about $14. In the United States, before there was testimony in Congress, they showed that the same pen costs $540. Absolutely ridiculous how much more Americans have to pay for pharmaceuticals relative to other countries. And it's completely the consequence of how the system has been designed. Luckily, President Trump has a lot of authority through rulemaking and through executive orders to affect HHS directly. There's a lot of flexibility within Medicare and Medicaid to actually make decisions at the top from the executive branch with no need from Congress.
But the reality also is, Rich, that can be undone. As easily as it was done, it can be undone. What I want to know from you, Jacob, is there a movement among Republicans to seize this particular issue and strip away the strength of the very laws that are being used as barriers against the American consumer? See, in my world, this is what I want. I'm also uncomfortable. I got to tell you something, Jacob. I don't like this power because I realize it's fine when your guy's in there, but there will be a time when your opponent is in there. So I like our old system where it used to take lawmakers to write laws and lawmakers to remove laws. But the problem is, are we just past that point? Is it always going to be this president do this, president do that? I'm baffled as to why Republicans aren't ripping it down.
We'll see. We'll absolutely see. I mean, you have to understand that Trump's move to do this is completely unprecedented. No president has made this move since the passage of Medicare and Medicaid back in about 1965. So, I mean, if Trump does do this, and prices do go down, I can't imagine American citizens would be okay with prices going right back up after another administration takes over. Right now, Americans are shell-shocked because their prices have just been so large for decades. But if they go down, and then there is pressure to keep them down after an unprecedented reduction in prices, I think it would actually be very hard for a future administration to undo what Trump does. And I guess that's really all I have to say. I mean, the future will tell.
Well, you got a lot more to say. I'm keeping you on for a couple more minutes here, kid. So, no, I'm kidding. But isn't the drug prices and the problem with them a larger, really an arm of the body of problems that the Medicaid and Medicare system created?
Oh, most certainly. You have to understand that the Medicare and Medicaid system, the way that they reimburse drugs actually incentivizes drugs to be very highly priced. Basically, every single time there's a reimbursement for drugs, it's pegged to the private prices. Now, some people might say, hey, that's good. We have some capitalistic pressure to keep these prices down. But the pharmaceutical companies are smart, and they actually weaponize that system in order to maximize their profits. The pharmaceutical companies are actually willing to lose some profit in the private drug market where people have private insurance in order to secure higher reimbursement rates from Medicare and Medicaid. Let me kind of explain how that happens.
Sure.
So basically, Medicare and Medicaid, they're reimbursed based off the average price and the lowest price sold. To give you a quick analogy, if you have 100 people who are on government insurance and they have 100 people who are not on government insurance, if the price of a drug is $5, the pharmaceutical companies are making some money, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if they increase the price to $100, maybe only one person in the private market can afford that price, and they would actually lose a little bit of money in the private market. But then every single person who has government insurance would have a government reimbursement of $100. It doesn't matter how many drugs are sold. It's only pegged to the average and to the minimum price. So basically, they're willing to sell less drugs to private consumers in order to gouge taxpayers for as much money as possible.
You all is a bunch of gangsters. Here's the other thing, Jacob, I want to know. Why isn't that particular argument being used to fight this idea of a government-run single-payer system?
Well, I mean, it's just unfortunate because we're already very close to a government-run single-payer system. I mean, if you consider the VA and Medicare and Medicaid, I think just about over half of Americans actually already have some sort of socialized medicine. And when you're getting socialized medicine and your medicine's for free, there's not much pressure to take away free stuff. I think there's a lot of arguments on how to redesign them for them to be more efficient. But really, there's just so much pressure on the private market and the people who actually pay for their own health care and taxpayers. It's quite unfortunate.
Do you think?
But there is, yeah.
Do you think it was Do you think it was an intention that Obamacare was created to mirror that system rather than fight it? Because what Obamacare did is simply take that concept and make it bigger and pretend to be somewhat private when it's really quasi-government run in the very least.
Most certainly. Medicaid expansion by itself is probably responsible for at least 90% of the increase in prescription drugs. And if you look at insulin spending in particular, we've gone from $1.4 billion a year in 2007 to $13.3 billion a year in 2017. And that's because so many insulin patients have actually been moved to public systems through either Medicare or Medicaid. And again, they're just increasing the prices of these insulin pens. Maybe less people with private insurance can afford them, but then they're going to gouge taxpayers because Medicare and Medicaid are completely indiscriminate about how they reimburse.
Jacob,
they're actually reimbursed. Yeah.
Would you stay with me through the break, please, Jacob? Do you mind?
Love to.
I want to ask you some more questions. Thank you so much. We'll be back after this. AM560 The Answer. Sean Thompson in for Steve Cortez. Back with Jacob Rich. Jacob, I want to ask you one question that I've been dying to ask people because I've been around for quite a while. You wouldn't know it, but I'm rather old. And when Barack Obama was running, he was running under this utopian healthcare system, which all tyrannies it's a cornerstone of all tyrannies. And once it's in place, once it's cemented, it's really never taken out without an absolute collapse. Republicans went from tear it out, tear it out, tear it out to very quietly tear it out and replace it. Somehow the replace it snuck in there. Are we ever going to go to a system that recognizes we're a finite creature and there is no utopia here? Things were much better prior to the monopoly insurance companies had when they cooperated with government.
I think there is some hope. Now, we have to understand that Republicans are just as, they're not as, they really can't resist handouts, and their constituents can't resist handouts as much, to an equal playing field as Democrats. I mean, everyone likes free stuff from the government. I mean, that's why whenever a Republican administration takes over, it tends to spend more than the Democratic administration before it. But I think there is hope, because I think there are ways to redesign the healthcare system such that we can put market mechanisms into place and we can actually make private providers of health insurance accountable, because they will actually have a profit incentive to do so. I mean, if we look at what other countries are doing, there's actually a few systems that are probably debatably more capitalistic than the United States. I'm not talking about the socialized systems of Canada or the UK
talking about
or
Sweden.
some of the Nordic countries or Sweden. But if you look at Switzerland, what they do is they basically give every single person who isn't able to afford health coverage, they give them a stipend to buy on the private market, and then it's completely within the jurisdiction of the company that individual hires to have their government funding to provide them insurance to make as much money as possible and to keep their prices low. So that's one way of having government make sure that there's complete coverage, while at the same time keeping pressure on the hospitals and the pharmaceutical companies and all the people ravaging the American system to keep the prices low.
In your expertise of policy and understanding what's happening in Washington, D.C., is Donald Trump a threat to K Street, or are they just impenetrable? Will they just live forever?
In terms of healthcare and pharmaceutical drugs, he's probably the biggest threat that we've seen probably since the passage of Medicare and Medicaid since Johnson in the 60s. I mean, there's other issues that I wish he'd be better on, but in terms of importing prescription drugs, he's doing absolutely fantastic. No one would ever discuss the idea of importing prescription drugs. And like you asked earlier, you asked if the Republicans are for this. The Republicans are quite split, because Republican interests are actually heavily funded by the pharmaceutical industry. And when I was talking to some people behind closed doors, they actually threatened me and said that they would deride what I'm saying as importing socialism, when in fact, if we have drug importation, we're exporting capitalism. We're basically forcing other countries to assume the cost of innovation that Americans are currently paying.
Well, Rich, listen, or Jacob, Rich, when you ever get threatened again, I'm going to have Misty give you my cell phone number. I love that stuff. You've got to get me involved in that, because the idea that these nerds in their off-the-rack Brooks Brothers suits are going to push you around, it doesn't set well with me. I'm having a hard enough time having these mafia Democrats in Chicago, Illinois do it, let alone some K Street lobbyists. And the reality is they normally do it with money, and they wait till you're elected to Congress. And once you get in there, have you ever seen it successfully pulled out?
Never.
Oh,
absolutely never.
I was hoping for a little more than a one-word answer, not just because I have time. I was hoping you'd give me some hope. And you know something? It's because, Jacob, I've watched good people run, get elected, and all of a sudden just become bagmen. And it's sickening to me that we are in this system where, unfortunately, our only hope is actually somebody who does things by kind of an abuse of power that I wish they didn't have. But you've been a wonderful guest. I want to thank you so much for coming on. Please come on again, and I won't fault you for calling me Steve.
Oh, no problem, Sean.
Right,
thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you so much. We'll be back after this with your calls. Thank you.